hello. Thanks so much for checking us out. I'm Emma Goswell, and I'm your host for Coming Out Stories. We're a podcast from What Goes On Media, and we bring you real-life stories from amazing individuals who just happen to be part of the LGBTQ+ community. Oh, and in order for us to continue bringing you brilliant episodes every fortnight, we're currently looking for sponsors. So, if you know someone who can help, or maybe you can help, please head to our website, that's comingoutStoriesPodcast.com, and click on the Work With Us tab. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you think you've got a story that might help others, why not put yourself forward to be interviewed? You can email us via that website, or you can also message us on the socials. On X, we are at Come Out Stories, and on Instagram, we are Coming Out Stories Pod. Time now, though, to meet up with this week's awesome interviewee. She is Anna DeShawn, and she also works in radio and podcasting, but in the US. She told me she identifies as a black queer woman and also as a social entrepreneur. Upbringing.
Yeah, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My mom, my dad, and my sister, who is 16 years older than me. So she was like a second mom. I have a huge family. My dad is one of 4. My mom is one of 10, maybe 12. Child.
Wow.
Daddy was a Rolling Stone. So I have a huge family. My mom is from Mississippi. My dad is from Chicago. Grew up in a working middle class home. My dad's a teacher. My mom is an accountant, business manager, and I had a great childhood.
Your dad was a teacher. Does that mean your family were quite well educated? And does that mean that they were tolerant when it came to having a queer child? Or is it not that obvious, really? Not that straightforward?
It's not that straightforward. But yes to the first half of that. My dad is very well educated, has a couple of master's degrees. My sister has a couple of master's degrees. My mother worked her way through school, got her undergraduate degrees. But also, my family is very religious. My father's family started a church on the south side of Chicago. My dad has one of his degrees is in theology and divinity. And so he pretty much is a pastor without having a church. So I grew up in 2 churches. My parents actually met at a Lutheran church in school because my dad was the teacher there and my sister was going to school there. So they had like a little scandal, love affair, a little at that church. And that's still where my parents attend today. So they've been at that church for over 40 years. So yeah, my family's very religious. So it wasn't as obvious. I mean, my dad, when I came out to him, he said I just hadn't found the right guy yet. So that happened a couple of times. My mom said she always knew. She just never thought I'd say anything.
Yeah, we'll come on to those conversations in a little while. But so what sort of messages were you getting about homosexuality or what it meant to be gay when you were growing up in that religious background?
I don't remember anyone ever saying anything specifically to me, but I understood that it wasn't normal, quote unquote, right? It was not the norm. It was not something that was going to be necessarily accepted. That was clear to me.
And when did you first realise, oh, hang on, there's something going on here. I am not as obsessed with boys as much as my mates are, or there's something different about me?
Definitely high school. High school. Everybody had a boyfriend. I did not. And I was not interested in boys in the same way. And they were having all types of escapades, and I did not. I was just not interested. But it was definitely in high school where I began to recognize, oh, maybe there's something different about me.
So did you never date a boy?
I never dated a boy. I've never had sex with a guy. Yeah. There was a guy who had a crush on me in high school, and that was okay. That was fine. But I was never crazy attracted to guys. I had this one guy at one point, I can't even remember his name, and that was fine, but it was nothing like the stories my friends were telling. It was nothing similar to that.
Were they questioning it? Were they going, Anna, who do you fancy? And, why haven't you got a boyfriend yet? Were there questions?
I remember a rumor in high school that had surfaced, like, Anna's gay. And I was like, what? And everyone else was like, no, that's just how Anna dresses. Everyone just, I was a tomboy, no doubt about it. But people were just like, that's just how Anna dresses. That's just how Anna is. She's not gay, And I had not reconciled that myself. It was just who I was. as far as I was concerned. So the answer was no until college.
But when they were saying, oh, Anna's gay, was there any negativity around it? Was there any bullying around it? Because I've spoken to plenty of people who did have a terrible time at high school because of it.
Yeah, I never got bullied. You know, for all intents and purposes, I could probably be considered a cool kid. And my dad was the principal also. Let's also put some context around this. My dad was the principal at the high school. My dad was the dean of students. My aunt was the secretary. Okay, my family, my cousins went there. My sister graduated from there. So my family had a legacy at this high school. I was an athlete. I was in the choir. I was in the band. I was student council president. I was pretty involved.
You were popular. Yeah.
I was popular, but popular also because my dad was the principal. And I had grown up at this high school my whole life. So I was not bullied, and no one necessarily questioned that rumor. That rumor didn't go very far, right? So I never had that experience.
Well, that's good to hear. And what about your first experience when you realised the penny dropped? You know, you said that other people were saying Anna's gay, but when did the penny drop for you? And when did you first think, oh, I've got the hots for a woman now?
I would say in college, there was a woman there, and she was just so hot. And I was kind of toying with the idea. A lot of people was like, oh, she's gay, but I ain't own it. So, it's one of those things where if you don't say it yourself, people it's just a, nah, it's everybody just talking until the person actually says it, right? And so I remember that we were at a party and we were partying and all this stuff, and she just kissed me. She just laid it on me, and I was like, well, I think I like that. I like that a lot, actually.
You were lucky, Anna. The first person you fancied kissed you.
She did. She was aggressive. I think she was tired of me, probably not making a move or something. Yeah, and so we were together my whole college career, actually. We were together for all 4 years of college.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And when you went home from that party, how did you sort of process it? Were you traumatized in any way, or were you just madly in love and didn't care what anyone thought?
Oh, child, it was a total U-Haul situation. I'm almost certain there was no hesitation. I was like, oh, I really like that.
I'm moving in tomorrow. Yeah.
Most likely. That's it. I mean, I remember us rooming together, and I know we lived together, had an apartment at one point as well. So it wasn't long. And you know how it is in college at that time, especially, nobody's thinking about dorm room assignments, lesbians living together. I mean, it was separation of boys and girls at the school, so we had a winning situation.
Yeah, you did, didn't you? Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So that's interesting, because when you first said how you identify, you mentioned the word queer and you mentioned gay. So that was the first time you mentioned the word lesbian. Do you have a preference, or do you just sort of use whatever comes out your mouth at the time?
Whatever come out my mouth, child. It's all the same to me. The word queer, I became acquainted with that word during my master's work at Ithaca College, and I had took a class at Cornell, and it was a queer theory class, and that was the first time I had heard the word queer. And then there was a queer conference that took place at Cornell, and understanding the framing of that word, I began to adopt that word during that time. So that was about 17 years ago. But at the end of the day, Black, lesbian fits, child, gay, same gender loving, pick one. And then for me, they all are the same.
Because certainly, I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s. I'm probably a bit older than you, I imagine. But queer was just seen as a really awful slur, and there's lots of gay men I know who just cannot abide the word because that's what they were, spat at in the playground. But I like the way that it has been totally reclaimed, and actually, a lot of people feel more comfortable saying that than saying lesbian, don't they, or bisexual or whatever.
I think so, and I respect folks who choose not to use that word, because I can understand the harm that came along with that word at a specific time, right, in this country. So I understand that 100%. And I also understand the reframing of it, because for me, it's less about the binary. It's like breaking the binary. Lesbian is very clear. Is women who are attracted to women, gay men who are attracted to men. I find myself attracted to the female form, child. Who are you? You are fine to me. Okay. So for me, queer encapsulates more of who I am and doesn't feel as restrictive as the other words. And yet and still, whatever, Black lesbian, sure.
Well, you mentioned Black a few times there as well. Is it harder, do you think, to come out in the Black community? Plenty of people have told me that, but was that true for you?
I mean, my family's religious. I think Black folks are more outspoken, maybe about their disdain for LGBTQ folks, especially in religious settings. But I think the right-wing Republicans in this country are very white, and evangelicals are also very homophobic, child. So, and the South is very homophobic, and there's a lot of white folks mixed up in there too. So I think that narrative doesn't necessarily fit or align. I think it's hard, no matter who you are, to be able to say who you are and live in your truth 150% of the time. In my case, it was tough just because I grew up so religious. I just didn't know what my family was going to say. I remember having a lot of anxiety around that. I remember having a friend circle in college where I remember actually we talked about, like, if I come out and they were like, we're going to be your family forever. So whatever happens, we your family, you know. So I remember that support system being there because I really didn't know what was going to happen.
And what did happen? How did that conversation go down? Did you choose a moment? Did you sit your parents down together? What did you do?
Stay where you are. We'll be right back.
I have an overall fascination with making sure sex workers' history is retained in some way, because everyone else gets to know everyone else's story. And I feel like the people who are most deserving of that preservation of story feel like they have to die in silence in a way.
Well, I mean, we see the deepest, darkest secrets of men. I mean, and their desires and their fantasies and their issues too, and their phobias. Yeah, I think working girls do a lot of work they don't even realize, you know?
Madam, a podcast about Julie Moya and New York City's most famous brothel.
I didn't sit them down together. I did one at a time. Don't know why, but I did. So I came out to my mom, and she was like, oh, I always knew. I just never thought you were going to say anything. And we cried a bit, and she loved on me. And then I came out to my sister, and she was like, she started putting the pieces together, like, is that person your girlfriend then? And I was like, yeah, because we were coming home from college together, and she would be at my house for the holidays. All these things was happening. When my mom started to put the pieces together, she was like, I don't care who you are. What's not going to happen in this house is y'all sleeping in the same room, because we were just breaking all the rules in this very Christian house. So that happened. My dad, he was just like, oh, you just haven't found the right guy yet. So he was in quite some denial for some time, because he is just a very religious guy. You know, what he was taught was that it wasn't okay. And I think that as my family showed their acceptance, and I'm sure he probably talked to some friends and got some counsel, he came right on around. So he walked me down the aisle on my wedding day, and
stop it.
He comes to the gay bars where I have my gala every year, and everybody loves him and asks about him, and you know, he's good now.
That must have been a very proud moment then. Tell us about your wedding. I'm just planning my wedding at the moment, actually, so I'm always up for hearing about wedding stories.
Oh, yes. The wedding was epic. I think we hardly had 300 guests.
Wow.
It was a huge situation. It was awesome. We did have some strategic things we had to do, because I do have a religious family. And so my mom was like, we have to send everyone invitations, even if we don't think they're going to come. Or even if we don't think that they are accepting. And so we did that. And, you know, pleasantly surprised. The people who I didn't think were going to showed up. And the people who I thought were, they didn't. You know, life is funny that way. But all in all, the people that were supposed to be there were there. We had an amazing time. My dad held out a little bit on the walking me down the aisle, but my mom played a game. She was like, just tell him I'm going to do it. Tell him I'm going to walk you down the aisle, and then watch what he says. And so I did. I said, Mom just told me she going to walk you down the aisle. He was like, what? I said, Mom said she going to do it. So that quickly changed his mind.
I love that. So he came round then. I mean, that's brilliant, isn't it? Sometimes it is a bit of a journey for parents, isn't it? You know, they have to learn, you know, with you. They've had all those years of programming in advance of having a queer child, haven't they? They never thought they'd have to confront it.
100%. And I think My dad and I have never really talked about it, but I feel like he had probably some guilt or felt like maybe he had something to do with it. You know, I was definitely a tomboy. I was definitely a daddy's girl. He's a Hall of Fame coach. I grew up a gym rat. I was an athlete. We have the same initials, and he dresses fancy all the time. So he gets his initials embroidered on his shirts. And so when I was a kid, I would wear his shirts. He's a big guy too. These 3X shirts to church, these button-up shirts, just because the initials were the same, you know? My mom got tired of me during Easter, okay? Because my mom was that lady, okay? So I grew up with the ruffled socks and the dresses and the bows and the barrettes and all these things. And when I got to the age where I could tell her, I don't like dresses, okay? And she tried, and shopping with me was the utmost frustration. I put her through hell. She gave up. And so my dad would take me Easter shopping and shopping for clothes. And I would come back with suits. We would go to the men's shop where he'd get his suits made, and we would get stuff tailored. I mean, I think he felt like he probably had something to do with it, but it was just what I was comfortable in. So I think he had to maybe work through some of that.
Yeah. And what about friends? Did you come out to them first then, I guess? Because you said that you wanted that support network, though. How did those conversations go?
I don't think we had like a conversation. I think they were waiting on me to figure it out. And that kiss figured it out real fast. I think they were waiting on me to be able to say it out loud. It took a while for me to be able to say it out loud.
It does, though, doesn't it? And it's, you know, it shouldn't be a big deal, and yet it still is. Even in 2024, it's still a big deal to say those words, isn't it?
It is. It is, because there's something about being vulnerable in that way. And I think this is where queer folks are just so different. Because when you're up against who you are at such a young age, it really does shape your whole worldview. And I'll use I statements here because I grew up in the church, and because the church said this was wrong, and because I knew I was not wrong, because of everything else I had learned, you question a lot of stuff really early on and begin to look at things a lot differently than if I did not have to confront the essence of who I was at such a young age.
There is a lot to think about. So I always ask this question on my podcast, you know, what advice would you give to someone listening who, you know, not necessarily younger, some people leave it till a lot later in life, but someone that hadn't gone through that process yet and was still a bit scared to put their head above the parapet and say, hello, I'm here, I'm gay, I'm queer, or whatever.
Oh, just be kind to yourself. Give yourself the patience and the room, and do it in your own time. I hate when people out people. Like, that is not your place, it is not your business, okay? I think people come out when it's time and when they feel safe to do it. You know, everybody is not in a safe place to come out. Financially safe, you know, employment might be a challenge. It might not be safe with your employer. All these places that we inhabit in our everyday lives, it just might not be safe. And today, especially with all of the laws happening here, all the anti-trans, all the anti-LGBTQ laws, there's been over 500 introduced, right? I think the latest stat I saw. Yeah.
That's terrifying.
It's terrifying for people to think about coming out today. So be kind to yourself is what I'll say. And do it when it feels right.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned work there. It sounds like you sort of created your own media empire, haven't you, really? But was there a time when you had to come out to employers, or you felt awkward about coming out to employers, or not?
No. By the time when I came out to my parents, I was clear that I could care less who else knew.
Yeah.
I think that for me, that was what was on the other side of this thing. Once that was over, I was like, oh, freedom from that.
Yeah, what's interesting is, like myself, actually, and I know a few people that have done this, we've kind of made careers out of being gay and out of being how proud we are of who we are and how proud we are of our community, and we want to give back to our community. And that's kind of led you on your career path, hasn't it, really?
It really has. And I've really been blessed in the work environments that I've been in, that I didn't have to be in the closet. There was no expectation of that. The first job out of school, my boss was a lesbian. She ran the company. So
Brilliant.
that was no problem there. And then I ended up at a tech startup with a whole bunch of young people. And if you can imagine a tech startup, that's exactly the environment it was. No one cared about me being queer. And so I never had to be in the closet there. I was never in like old school corporate environment that being who you were was going to be called into question. So I was really blessed in that way. There was only one time at the tech startup where I had to be like, this ain't gonna work. It was, they were supposed to be taking company pictures, and they put all these rules around what you were supposed to wear and look like. I was like, I had to reply back. It's like, so you know I'm not wearing any of this, right? And you know that this ain't right?
Quite right.
And they came back and they fixed it. They recognized, yeah, that ain't right. And it wasn't a big deal. It was no big blow up. It was an email, and then they fixed it, right? So that was the sort of environment I was in. And to your point, I've made a career out of being proud and queer and Black and wanting to tell our stories. And in so many ways, I come out every day when people ask me what I do for a living. And well, I'm just a queer out here doing queer things, telling queer stories,
Yeah, so tell us a bit about all the work you do then. I know there's sort of many prongs to it, isn't there? But it's all media related, really. Was it the radio station that came first? Tell us a bit about setting that up.
It was. The station came first. I started it in November of 2009 on Blog Talk Radio. And I was just invested in telling our stories. At that time, I wasn't bought in that it needed to be queer all the time. It was not. If you find a logo of E3 Radio from back in the day, it's purple and white. There is no rainbow in the middle of it. I had not bought into that. But it was clear after some time that that's exactly what I cared about, because that was every guest. Every freaking guest was queer. So, like, Anna, get out your own way. That was a moment. So it was a passion project. And I just loved it. I love radio. That's what I went to school for. I love media. I've always been invested in telling stories. It's just always been in me. I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I wanted to be Robin Roberts.
I had to look this person up, by the way, because it's on your website that you've always been in love with.
Oh, yes. Oh, you looked them up? Yeah, she's
everyone
amazing.
in America will know who she is, but,
they will.
International listeners might not. I don't know.
They might not, but just know she was amazing. And she was the only Black woman on sports television here in the States while I was growing up. She was my representation that it's possible. Mm-hmm. And now she's on national television and doing her thing. But I just felt a connection with her, too, because her family was from Mississippi, where my mom is from. And I just felt like she came from there and she here. Like, I can do it, too. So that's where the radio station started. It took many forms over the years. Today, we play queer music all day long. And then we have the Queer News podcast was born out of that I host now every Monday. I would love for people to check out Queer News. Our Queer News podcast, we drop 4 to 5 news stories that I think queer folks care about that aren't getting the news coverage that they deserve. And so we're creating a space where we can have our own news, where we can follow up on our own stories, where we're always the top story.
Yeah, and of course it's international as well, isn't it? Because I know one of your recent episodes covered the legalisation of gay marriage in Greece, which was quite a big deal just a few weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I love following what's going on around the world when it comes to LGBTQ rights. I know the U.S. is seen as sort of, I don't know what it's seen as, child, to be honest, but I mean, it's legal, but marriage is legal. But there are so many fights happening here. There's so many fights going on across the world. There are people who are literally fighting for their lives and their livelihoods in other parts of the world. And so I'm always very interested in what's happening everywhere.
I mean, you could have a full-time job just covering all the legislation changes in America, couldn't you, really? And it's almost like one step forward, 2 steps back sometimes, isn't it, really, history?
It really is. Nadine Smith has a wonderful analogy. She's the executive director of Equality Florida, and she is fighting in Florida against one of the biggest bigots we've seen in our lifetime, Ron DeSantis. And she has this analogy where she calls the slingshot analogy, where right now we're being pushed backwards and we feel like we keep getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. And she says, what happens is, though, when they think they got you and the slingshot releases, you end up further ahead than you were when they first started. And she said, we just got to keep fighting because we're going to win and we're going to be farther ahead when we get done. So I hold on to her analogy really close because it's really hard right now.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to look at it, actually. We have to keep fighting. And like you said, we have to keep telling our stories and pushing our truth and making the world aware of what the queer community are going through.
Absolutely. But even just recently, what's happened here in the States with Next Benedict, 16-year-old non-binary sophomore who was beat up in their bathroom and then passed away the next day and had been bullied for over a year and no one did anything, right? I mean, these things are happening. Trans women are being murdered. No one is being held accountable. And for some reason, people think hate is free speech. And hate is not free speech. Hate is hate. It's very simple. We teach our children hate is wrong. And yet adults grow up and hate all over the place. So things that people make very complicated, for me, seem very simple.
So you've got the radio station and the news podcast, but tell us a bit now about the Cube, because that's your own platform, isn't it? How did that come about?
It was in a transition with the station and in a meeting where we started talking about podcasting. Because podcasting hadn't gone away, people started listening to radio differently, and we started consuming media differently. We started consuming media on demand, like whenever we want to, right? I was like, we have to transition into podcasting if we're going to remain relevant. And so I tell people all the time, the Cube was born out of E3 radio, literally. E to the power of 3 is to cube something mathematically. And it hit me in the shower. And I was like, oh, we just change the cube, the C to a Q and make it queer. And now we have the Cube. So quite literally, the Cube was born out of E3 radio.
Very clever. So what does the Cube do?
So we're a platform, a curated platform for you to discover the very best Black and brown podcasts out here in the world. And so we're producing our own pods. We call them Cube Originals. And we're telling stories, Black LGBTQ stories, and folks at the intersections. And then the platform is, child, I've heard all types of things. They be like, Anna, you the Bumble of podcasting. I was like, all right, like, we'll match you up to your favorite pod. That's cool. I've also heard we're like the Black queer Spotify. I said, if that works for you, we can be that too. For the most part, podcasting has been a white male game. And today, 43% of the people listening are people of color. But you couldn't tell that by opening any podcasting app today. So in my mind, the Cube is the first platform that is centering the lives of Black and brown folks in this space and creating a place for people to find the best content. So that is what the Cube is.
I do like the idea of a Black queer Spotify. That just sounds exactly what the world needs, really.
I think so.
And where are you going to take it all next then? You've got quite a big media empire already, but what's next for you then, Anna?
Well, we've been doing these silent parties, Emma, that I think they're going to take off. I don't know where it's going to take me, but I feel like they're going to catch on. So we take silent headphones, we take our podcasts, and we bring them as an event. And so we listen to snippets, 3 to 5 minute snippets of podcasts, and then we talk about them in community and have some of the most honest, raw conversations. It is so good. We're on a college tour. We just did 2 stops in New York, and I'm looking to take this program across the country.
Oh, bring it to England, please. I'll come along.
Come on, Emma, hook it up. I'm here for it, okay? Let's do it. I've been wanting to come to London. I want to come to the podcast show. So, yeah, that's the next thing.
Fantastic. Well, carry on being fabulous and queer and running your own media empire and inspiring the next generation, because, see, what Robin Roberts did for you, you will be doing for the next generation. And that's just so powerful, isn't it?
I'm going to sit with that. I'm going to sit with that. I receive it, and I'm going to sit with it.
You don't want to be called a role model, but you are.
I don't mind it. I don't mind the role model title, being aligned with Robin Roberts in that way. Thank you for seeing that. She means so much to me. So the thought that I can mean that much to somebody else, right, is a lot for me to take in, but I receive it. I hope that my work does inspire other people to do their work and to live in their truth and to speak their truth. That is my hope for the work. And it is still hard for me to receive it when someone says it out loud.
The one and only Anna DeShawn talking to me there. A huge thank you to her for taking time out of her busy day. Do go and find her. She is Anna DeShawn across all social media. Oh, and do check out her brilliant content too. E3 Radio and the Queer News podcast you heard about is also on YouTube, by the way. And you can find more about the Cube that she talked about by following the Cube app on Instagram, X, and basically all the socials. That is the QUBE app, just to make it clear. Oh, and listen, you really don't want to miss the next episode. Jenny is a trans woman who really jumped into the deep end with her coming out. The first time she ever left the house dressed as her true self in women's clothes was also the first time she did a stand-up comedy gig. Yes, really. She'd previously dressed at home in secret, and she told me it had caused all sorts of problems.
I would say there were loads of times that mysterious things happened in my house that people couldn't explain. My mum found a pair of tights once. My girlfriend at the time certainly didn't wear tights. So when my mum found the tights, she thought I was seeing somebody else and had a real go at me that I was cheating on my girlfriend.